Why some people feel more present than others. Someone helps you with something and you say, thanks. Cool. Maybe you say, I appreciate it. Also normal. But every once in a while, somebody says something that is almost the same size, maybe even less impressive on paper, and somehow it lands completely differently. Like somebody just looking at you and saying, respect. That's it. One word. And obviously, respect is not some magical phrase. Somebody can say it automatically too. That's not really the point. The point is that sometimes you can feel when a sentence did not come from the situation itself. It came from the person actually noticing something. And I've always found that weird because there are certain people who just feel more there. Not necessarily louder, not smoother, not even more socially skilled. Sometimes they're actually pretty quiet. But every once in a while they'll say something and you're like, oh, you were actually watching. A ridiculous amount of conversation is basically autocomplete. And I don't mean that negatively. Someone holds the door. Thank you. No problem. Cashier says, have a good one. You too. Somebody asks how you've been. Pretty good. You could probably remove both people from half of these conversations, and the dialogue would still know what to do, because the situation already contains the next sentence. And honestly, thank God. Imagine if every human interaction required some original statement about the nature of your relationship. You hand somebody their receipt and they stare into your eyes and go, I noticed the restraint with which you handled my groceries today. Like, bro, please just say thanks. We need social glue. Most language probably should be lightweight. That's part of what makes society tolerable. But because so much language is generated this way, I think you become unusually sensitive to the moments where it clearly wasn't. Maybe you accomplish something. Everybody says congratulations, and they mean it. Then one person goes, you looked more relieved than happy. That's a completely different thing. Now you stop. Because congratulations came from the event. That sentence came from an observation. Or maybe you're helping somebody through something difficult and eventually they say, thanks for listening. Normal. Then somebody says, you never tried to tell me what I was supposed to feel. Again, that's not necessarily more eloquent. There isn't even anything grand about it. But for them to say that, they had to have processed something specific first. There is evidence behind the sentence. That's the part I'm interested in, because there's a difference between language that completes the interaction and language that proves attention happened. And I think you can feel that distinction almost instantly. You can tell when somebody's sentence came from a place you couldn't autocomplete. That might actually be why certain tiny comments have so much social weight. It's not the number of words. It's not even necessarily the meaning of the words in isolation. It's what had to happen internally before the words could exist. For me to say, thanks for helping, I mostly need to know that you helped. For me to say, you stayed even after everybody else left, I had to notice the sequence. I had to register something. And the sentence is basically carrying a receipt for that attention. It quietly says, I was here. That reached me. I noticed something specific about what you did. And this is where I think it starts overlapping with what people call presence. Because presence usually gets described from the outside. How someone walks into a room, eye contact, posture, stillness, confidence, the way they speak, whether people turn toward them. Basically, how effectively somebody captures everybody else's attention. And sure, that is one form of presence, but there might be another version that works almost backwards. Somebody can feel present because you can tell the world is actually entering them, not just bouncing off. They absorb enough of what's happening that every now and then something specific comes back out. And when it does, you notice. That's interesting to me because it means somebody could have very little conventional charisma and still feel unusually alive in an interaction. They don't need to dominate it. They don't even need to talk much. They just need to occasionally prove that information made it all the way inside. I think this is also why some conversations feel technically fine but weirdly empty. Nothing went wrong. Nobody was rude. You talked for 30 minutes. Everybody responded appropriately. And yet you leave with this strange feeling that almost nothing actually happened. Like both of you were there, but the conversation could have happened with two slightly different people and barely changed. And then other times you talk to somebody for 5 minutes and one comment sticks with you for 2 days. That's kind of insane. 5 minutes, one sentence. But that sentence had specificity in it. It couldn't have been given to just anybody. That matters. Now, there is obviously a dangerous version of this, because noticing more does not mean understanding more. You can be extremely observant and completely wrong. Actually, sometimes those two things probably combine in a terrible way. You notice every facial movement, every pause, every shift in somebody's voice, and then build a completely fictional explanation for all of it. Now you're not present, you're just running surveillance. And there's also a person who wants very badly to look perceptive. You know the type. Every interaction gets turned into some profound reading of who you are. You say you're tired and suddenly they've diagnosed your relationship with your father. Relax. Sometimes somebody slept 4 hours. That's it. So I don't think the goal is notice everything or always say the deep thing. That would become another performance. And once somebody is performing observation, you can almost feel that too. The comment stops being about what they noticed and starts being about showing you that they are the kind of person who notices things. Different mechanism. The observations that hit hardest usually seem almost accidental. The person wasn't trying to prove anything. They just saw something and eventually it leaked into speech. That word, leaked, is probably closer to what I mean. Because presence might not be something people deliberately display. Sometimes you just get little leaks from whatever is happening inside their attention. A question nobody else asked. A distinction nobody else made. Remembering some tiny thing you said 3 weeks ago. Noticing that your reaction didn't match what everybody assumed you were feeling. And again, none of these guarantee wisdom. They just provide evidence that the person's internal model of the interaction has some resolution. There is actually information in there. Maybe that's also why broad compliments can sometimes feel weaker than oddly specific comments. You're smart. Nice. You're funny. Cool. You're a good person. Also nice. Those things can be completely genuine. But they're broad enough that they don't necessarily tell you how the person arrived there. Then somebody says, "You're weirdly calm," when everyone else starts panicking. Now there's an image behind it. They saw something happen. They made a comparison. They formed an impression. And now the compliment, if it even is a compliment, feels heavier because it's attached to evidence. There's a big difference between being evaluated positively and being perceived specifically. I think people crave the second one more than they realize. Not constantly. That would be suffocating. But every once in a while, yeah, it hits. And maybe this is why the word presence is a little misleading, because it makes you imagine somebody projecting, somebody whose personality occupies a lot of space. But maybe some of the people who feel most present aren't broadcasting harder. They're receiving more. And then once in a while, the quality of that reception becomes visible. Not through some huge speech, usually through something tiny. A sentence the situation itself did not require. Something that proves they weren't just waiting for their turn to respond. Something you couldn't have predicted before they said it. And for 1 second you realize, oh, you actually saw that. Maybe presence isn't only about being noticed. Maybe sometimes it's about proving that you notice.